Karen, thank you for joining us during this video series that we're taping information for children's ministers and their people, their workers to learn. And so we're excited about this series. Karen Tayne is joining us. She is she's the preschool women's minister at MacArthur Boulevard Baptist Church in Irving, Texas. You've been there 23 years.
Yes.
Karen started out as the weekday director and then became the preschool and children's minister, and then became the full-time preschool minister as the church grew. And now you're preschool and women's ministry, which in your neck of the woods or at your church, those things fit hand in hand in your ministry.
They do.
Yeah, I've watched you. And they don't always fit hand in hand, but for you, they do. So today I want to talk about boys and girls and just differences that boys and girls have. And I know that you have led trainings on this. So what really piqued your interest in this topic?
Well, it was actually an SBTC event years ago that Mary Ann Bradbury was speaking to us on this topic, and I just found it fascinating. And so over the years, I've researched more. She is by far an expert. That is her field, but it has been fascinating to learn those things and see how it truly affects a classroom that has boys and girls in it.
Yeah, it does. And you know that because you have a son, you have two sons and a daughter.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yes.
I remember the first time I heard someone speak on this topic, it was many years ago, and it made parenting, it gave me a different dynamic to looking at my children because there are differences in boys and girls. So so we agree that there's notable differences in the gender, the way they learn. So tell us what you found in your research and listening to Mary Ann.
Yes. Well, one of the differences that can really impact a classroom is just in the difference in their hearing. Arlene Taylor has a great website that gives a lot of this detail. Girls can hear quieter and higher pitch noises a whole lot easier. They will be distracted very easily. By the age of 11, because it just grows, a girl can hear 10 times more than what a boy can hear when it comes to small noises.
Wow.
So what you need to understand there is that when you're doing a teaching time, to have girls away from like a noisy hallway or a sink where another teacher may be washing some toys or a clock that's loud. Boys also have trouble hearing soft, high-pitched noises, and it often takes them longer to hear and differentiate the sounds. So with a setting where you have girls and boys, to have boys up closer and girls a little bit further away. Girls are more sensitive to the noise. If you're a man that is teaching, to not speak really loudly because that is overwhelming for girls as far as what they're hearing. But if you're a woman who's teaching, a boy needs you to speak a little bit louder and be able to pick up on that. So that's something you may want to keep in mind as far as the positioning of the boys and girls during a story time.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And who would have thought that a difference would be hearing?
Right.
And so that goes to the miraculous thing of the body that God created. Okay, so hearing. What other differences have you found?
Well, you probably have often heard how women think with both sides of their brains and men typically think with one and then the other. And so that is evident even at a very young age. So that can come out in language processing. Girls can articulate a lot quicker than boys as to what they're feeling or what they're thinking. And boys typically, because they're thinking one hemisphere at a time, it will take them a little bit longer to connect the verbal processing to what the feeling they're having. So how that plays out in a classroom is if you're asking a question about, Bobby, how did that make you feel? Or what do you think Jesus meant by that? Or how do you think the Good Samaritan felt about the man that he found? It's going to take him a while to process that feeling and thinking through it. It also comes out whenever you're in a discipline situation. And I've seen this play out several times where you have, for boys, a lot of times it comes out in frustration or anger or aggression because they can't get the words to tell you what the issue is. So even if whether they have done something to wrong someone or if they have been wronged, sometimes it takes a while for those little emotions to calm down and for them to get the words to be able to express to you exactly what happened or what they're thinking or feeling. Whereas a little girl typically can very quickly articulate.
So if you, in the classroom, if you had something that happened between a little boy and a little girl, I've seen this play out in my home with my grandchildren. And so the little boy is crying, and the little girl, we tend to think that she's tattling, right? Because she can automatically
tell you everything.
Yeah. And so how do you handle that situation? What's the best way? You've got conflict and it's in front of you. What does the teacher do?
We had a situation with a little preschool boy that was amazingly articulate for his age, but week after week we would have these emotional roller coasters. And I found that the best thing for me to do was simply kind of remove him from the situation, give him a drink of water, give him a chance to catch his breath, even talk about something unrelated to what just happened, to just calm him down and let his little brain settle in. And then I could say, so tell me exactly what happened between you and Susie. And he was able to articulate a whole lot better than he was in the moment.
That's very good. So what happens in that classroom so now we hope you have 2 or 3 teachers in the classroom.
Right.
So you've pulled him away, you're getting him a drink, letting him calm down. What's happening to the little girl at the same time?
A lot of times the little girl will very quickly, like you said, be able to articulate what happened. And so to allow her to step aside and not be adding to what the little boy is trying to say, either to go back to playing, or if it was an issue that she needs to sit for a moment, or to hand off to another teacher, that would be, appropriate. But to not let her chime in whenever the little boy's trying so hard to put words to explaining his story. But like in a story setting, when you may be trying to reiterate what you just taught, just know that it can be a little overwhelming for a little boy to try and come up quickly with an answer to, how do you think Noah felt whenever he was loading up that boat, and stuff like that.
Well, and that's something that will stay with little girls and little boys for the rest of our lives. Their lives. I see it. I work with a lot of men, and I want to finish their sentences for them. Yeah. So it never goes away. Yeah. Never goes away. Okay. What's a third way that they're different?
Multitasking. Girls have more white matter, which indicates they have more connections going between the neurons, and so they're better at multitasking. Boys have more neurons and gray matter, and their brains are actually 10 to 15% larger than girls. So they're less efficient at multitasking, but they really excel at learning through task. So how that affects the classroom. When it comes to needing to do 2 or 3 things, you might be able to say to a little girl, Susie, we're going to clean up the blocks, put our coloring pages in the hallway, and then gather over here for story time. But for a little boy, you're going to need to say, Johnny, it's time to clean up the blocks. And when he's finished with the blocks, say, let's put our coloring sheets out in the hallway. And then say, okay, it's time for us to come over here and get ready for story time. Because boys do well with learning through task, to have things that they can do while they're learning a story. Have them be able to do something with models or do something with their hands to help bring a story home. That's very helpful. And just giving them more time to transition from one thing to another, so that they're ready to come over and give their full attention at story time.
Yeah, that goes into classroom management then.
Right.
So how are you, when you're doing your schedule, how are you scheduling the transitions? We know transition time is important.
Right. Yeah, it's even helpful with a boy with all kids, but to have like a timer that says we're going to play for a while. And then when the timer goes off, it's going to be time for us to start cleaning up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's some kids that need that more than others. So that's a great hint on how you manage your classroom. And I know
Right.
each classroom will be different.
Mhm.
And some years, as you've seen in preschool, they'll be mostly boys.
Right.
And the next year, they're mostly girls.
Right.
And so this information helps you
Right.
in teaching
And
a lot.
And with what I should have said to begin with is you never want to overgeneralize. You know, every
True.
boy is not the same and every girl is not the same, but this is research that's helpful
Mhm.
in general.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And every class is different. So,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. What else do you have?
Difference in movement. Girls, for the most part, don't need to move in a classroom setting while learning. They usually can sit contently and listen. But boys, because of the spinal fluid, the larger cerebellum, the lower serotonin, the higher metabolism, they need to move. They just need to be moving all the time sometimes. And really, that helps promote their learning. Boys need more space to move than a girl does. And so, how does that play out in a classroom? Well, if you're telling the story of Jericho, take a moment and have them march around 7 times. If you're telling the story of building the ark, give them some tools and help them, let them have something that they're doing and moving. Be aware that because they need more space, at a table that you might sit 6 or 8 girls, you may want to sit just 4 boys there and allow them to be able to move more. Another really helpful resource for me was the Raising Boys and Girls series by Trevathan, Goff, and Thomas. One thing they said is we best wake the male brain with movement. It primes the brain for learning. Mm-hmm. And so just getting them moving puts boys in a better space to be able to talk and to learn and understand what you're saying. Try getting the wiggles out ahead of time. Give them places to move, and that's all helpful.
I think in that book also they remind us that when boys are moving, they're learning, and so their movements that brings a new appreciation for what's really happening to them. Mm-hmm. While they're moving, they're learning, and if they're sitting still, their brain is just sitting still.
Right. Yeah, it was Marianne Bradbury. I don't know that she said it first, but it says she used the term, if the bum is numb, the brain is the same. And that's very true.
That's hilarious.
They need to be able to move.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that is good information for the classroom and for parents.
Right.
Parents that are frustrated with little boys are always moving. Well, there's a reason there's moving.
Right.
They're moving.
Right.
I think also David Thomas addresses that in his book, Wild Things.
Yes.
And so very interesting. I years ago when I was a children's minister, I remember this was, I think, the classroom that I walked into that I'm about to describe were the older kids, like 4th grade little boys and girls. And I walked in, and to my left, there was a teacher, and she had little girls, and they were sitting at their table. They had their Bibles out. They were writing. They were quiet, very engaged in what they were doing. Across the way to my right, when I walked in, all the little boys were standing up. And the man that was leading them, they were all hunched over looking at something on the table.
Right.
And I said, so I walked over because, I wanted to know what was happening. Well, he had little toy soldiers. They were modern little toy soldiers. I mean, just like you get at Target. And they were reenacting battles in the Old Testament.
Wow.
And every little boy was engaged. Totally engaged.
Right.
And so it was a very good example of what you're talking about. There were different things happening, but they were, because these teachers knew their kids,
right,
they were able to take it to a new level.
Right.
And so those kids were learning that day. So anyway,
exactly.
Very interesting. Okay, what else do you have for us?
Probably the other thing is managing boredom. I know boys can get bored a lot more easily than girls. It requires they need more stimulation and so forth. And so that goes back to the movement part. They need to be engaged in what they're doing. Lecture style doesn't work well when it comes to boys. And so keep that in mind. Have those object lessons ready. Have things they can hold in their hands, have a picture or have something that they can creatively take part in as you're telling the story. And remember, the rule of storytelling is it's 1 minute per age. So if you're talking with 3-year-olds, it's about a 3-minute attention span.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're talking with 8-year-olds, it's about 8 minutes. Now, that time starts over every time you introduce a new element. So you can tell the story for about 3 minutes and then take a break and pull out an object lesson or pull out a visual.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, the 3 minutes starts over. They're 3 minutes engaged in this next thing. And then you can go back to the story, or then you can go to something they're doing with their hands. So just keep that in mind before you sit down before 3-year-olds to tell an 8-minute story lecture style. Little boys will get bored very easily, and probably most little girls too.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's a good point. So if the time begins over each time, so you can work on your and large group time. Let's just say you can work on your Bible verse,
right?
And if you're doing activities, then by the time you get to let's say, then you maybe sing a song and there's movement, then you could tell the story.
Right, exactly.
And play a game with the story. And really, you've had a good 10 or 12 minutes in large group time.
Right. And even having them come up and reenact what they've just heard, or Bobby, come up here and tell me how you would tell this story. I mean, each one of those times is reiterating the story through music, through activity, through story time, and you can restart that clock.
Yeah, that's good. So, okay, so the 5 areas that we discussed today, the first one was
in hearing.
So they have a difference in hearing, which I find fascinating, and we could have a whole lesson on that, right? And then the next one was
in language processing.
So girls hear smaller. Back to the hearing. Girls hear. They hear. Tell me.
They hear quieter, higher pitched sounds, and can be distracted by noises that boys will barely notice.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That answers so many questions. Okay. So then the next one was
the multitasking.
Multitasking.
Yeah.
Which everyone says, we all think we can multitask.
Right.
And that is not true.
Right.
So girls seem to be a little bit better than boys.
Right.
Boys like to focus on one thing.
And they're amazing at learning through task and using their hands and envisioning 3D things and so forth. So anytime you have like a model of something, that's super helpful for boys. They learn great that way.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, so then the third one was through
movement. Their need for movement.
So it's better if they're moving. And then the fourth was
just managing boredom, and just know that boys get bored a lot faster than girls do. So.
I get bored pretty fast, so I can only imagine little boys. Okay, if you had one final tip for managing boys and girls in the classroom, what would that final tip be?
I don't think it's necessarily managing, but it is definitely in something to consider. Consider whether or not you have men in your classroom, and that goes all the way down to the preschool age. It is important to have men there so that little boys see them. There's a quote that I love from Gordon West from years ago at a conference. The absence of men in most children's ministries communicates a message we don't want to pass on. It's a hidden curriculum that subtly teaches children that Christianity is women's business. Little girls are subconsciously programmed to believe that few men are truly capable of being spiritual leaders, and little boys leave Sunday school subtly convinced that real men rarely get involved in church and almost never are excited about God. It's important to have those men there, even if they're just sitting down playing blocks. But the more they can be present, praying, teaching a lesson, it sends a huge message to both the boys and girls.
And then you're watching men and women in the classroom, and you see the differences.
Right.
And that brings a normal presence.
Understanding.
Yes, that's right. That's good. Well, thank you very much. I
You're
really
welcome.
appreciate this information.
You're welcome.